Somerset, November 1816. The letter had arrived unsigned on a Wednesday, written in a hand that shook, and it contained a single line. "Your brother's daughter is not where you believe her to be." Emmerich Delvine, the 5th Duke of Ashfeld, had not seen his niece in 6 years. She had been 11 when his brother Corwin died. A fall from a horse on the North Ridge during a storm that should have kept any sensible man indoors. But Corwin had never been sensible, and Emmerich had spent 34 years loving him for precisely that quality, and being furious about it in roughly equal measure. After the funeral, Emmerich had entrusted the girl, Elowin, her fortune, her education, her future, to Lord Selwyn Cathmore, a family acquaintance, Corwin's nearest neighbor, the girl's godfather, a man of sufficient reputation, and a household that included a wife who was, by all accounts, warm. Emmerich had been 28, unmarried, managing 14,000 acres, and a grief he had organized into administration rather than feeling. A child required a household with softness in it. Cathmore's had that. It had seemed enough. He had sent quarterly funds. He had written letters, monthly at first, then seasonally, then with the thinning frequency of a man who had received steady assurances and had permitted those assurances to replace his attention. Every reply from Cathmore confirmed the same comfortable portrait. The girl was well. The girl was educated. The girl was flourishing. The unsigned letter said otherwise. He was on the road to the Cathmore estate before the light failed. He arrived at Cathmore Hall at 9:30 in the evening, which was not the hour for social calls, and was precisely the hour at which a household revealed what it actually was when it believed no one important was watching. The front of the house was lit and warm. The housekeeper, whose expression performed several calculations simultaneously upon seeing a duke unannounced on the doorstep, showed him to the drawing room and went to fetch Lord Cathmore. Emmerich did not sit. He stood at the window facing the rear courtyard and noticed what a man trained to read estates could not fail to notice. The grounds were maintained. The stone was clean. The stables were recently roofed. Money had been spent on this house, a great deal of money. Cathmore appeared within minutes, dressed for the evening, composed in the way of someone who had prepared for many things, but not for this. "Your Grace, what an unexpected—" "Where is Elowin?" Emmerich said. The pause was the answer, not its length, which was brief, but its quality, the fraction of a second in which Cathmore's expression reorganized itself from surprise into management. "She has retired for the evening. She keeps early hours as young women. I would like to see her. Surely in the morning would be more. Now." Cathmore's composure held, but something behind it shifted, the way a wall holds when the foundation beneath it has begun to move. He sent the housekeeper. They waited in the drawing room in a silence that Emmerich used to examine the furnishings, the new drapes, the French clock on the mantel, the portrait above the fireplace that had been recently commissioned. All of it paid for, he understood now, with the cold clarity of someone beginning to measure the full dimensions of a terrible error, with Elowin's money. The housekeeper returned alone. She addressed the carpet rather than either man. "Miss Delvane is not in her room, my lord." "Then where is she?" Emmerich said. Another pause. This one was longer and worse. He found her in the kitchen. Not the main kitchen, the scullery beyond it, the stone-floored room where the washing was done, and the scraps from the evening meal were collected before being taken out to the yard. She was sitting on a stool beside the basin, in a dress that had been good once and had been repaired so many times. The original fabric was a suggestion rather than a fact. She was eating, and eating was a generous word for it. The remains of what had been served upstairs. A heel of bread. The fat trimmed from a cut of mutton. A quarter of a potato. Cold, with the skin still on. She was 17. She was thin in the way that meant months, not days. And on the back of her left hand, written in ink that had been applied with the careful small letters of someone conserving both space and supply, were numbers. Columns of figures. Sums, tallied and retallied. Debts to the village grocer, the chandler, the apothecary, recorded on the only surface available to a girl who had been given no paper, no desk, and no reason to believe anyone was coming. She turned when he entered. She did not recognize him immediately, and that told him everything the kitchen had not. "Alawan," he said. She stilled. The bread remained in her right hand, held with the grip of someone who had learned not to set food down in a house where it might not be there when she reached for it again. She studied him with the focused attention of a person performing an identification under difficult conditions. The scullery was lit by a single tallow candle, and the intervening years are a considerable distance when measured from 11 to 17. "Uncle," she said. The word was flat. It carried no relief, no accusation, no warmth. It was a label, applied with the same precision as the figures on her hand, accurate, minimal, and entirely without excess. He would think about that flatness later, in the carriage, and he would understand that it was not indifference. It was the exhaustion of a person who had stopped expecting anything from anyone who shared her blood, and who had organized that absence of expectation into a practice so thorough it had become its own kind of composure. He examined the numbers on her hand. He could read them. He had managed accounts since he was 19, and the figures were precise. 3 shillings, 4 to the grocer. 1 and 6 to the apothecary. 2 shillings to a name he did not recognize, though he would learn later it was the woman in the village who had been quietly lending Alawan thread and cloth to maintain the dress she was wearing, because no one else had provided her with another. 7 shillings and 2 pence. That was the sum written on his niece's hand, the complete accounting of her survival, maintained on her own skin because she had been left nothing else to write on. He thought about the quarterly funds he had sent, £400 a year, for the duration of the arrangement. He thought about the French clock in the drawing room, and the new drapes, and the recently commissioned portrait. He thought about Cathmore's composure and the pause that had preceded it, and the precise quality of a man who had been stealing from a child and had dressed the theft in letters of reassurance. His niece was watching him with the expression of someone who understood exactly what he was seeing and was waiting, without expectation, to learn what he intended to do about it. The bread was still in her hand. He removed his coat and placed it over her shoulders. Not a solution to anything, merely the only thing available to him at that moment that did not require words. She did not flinch. She did not lean into it. She accepted the weight with the neutrality of someone being handed information she would evaluate later. "Come," he said. "We are leaving this house tonight." Cathmore was in the entrance hall when they came through from the kitchen passage. He had positioned himself between the front door and the staircase, with the spatial awareness of someone who had anticipated this movement and had prepared to manage it. He regarded Alawan in Emmerich's coat, and then Emmerich, and performed, in the space of a single breath, the recalculation of a man whose accounts have just been opened without his permission. "Your Grace, I understand this must appear." "It appears," Emmerich said, "precisely as it is. The girl has been well provided for. If she has chosen to. Chosen." Emmerich repeated the word, as though examining it for structural defects. He found several. "She is 17 years old, Cathmore. She is eating kitchen scraps in your scullery. She has her debts written on her hand because she has not been given paper. And you have spent her fortune on your drawing room. I do not require your explanation. I will require your records." Cathmore's expression underwent a transition that Emmerich catalogued with the precision of someone who would need to recall it later, in a solicitor's office. The managed composure, then the calculation beneath it surfacing briefly, then the reassembly. The records will show what they show, Emmerich said. My solicitor will collect them on Thursday. If anything is missing, the matter becomes criminal rather than civil, and I will not be the one choosing between the two. He walked Eloan to the carriage. She moved beside him with the measured pace of someone long accustomed to conserving energy in all things, including walking. She climbed in without assistance. He noted this, and settled against the seat with his coat still around her shoulders, and turned toward the window to watch the house she was leaving, with the expression of someone who had imagined this departure many times and had stopped believing it would arrive. The carriage moved. The Cathmore gates closed behind them. The Somerset dark was absolute. "Where are we going?" she said. It was the first question she had asked. "Ashfield," he said. "It is your family's house. It should have been yours all along." She turned her hand over in the dark. The numbers were still there. They arrived at Ashfield Hall past midnight, which meant the household was asleep, which meant Mrs. Fenmore, the housekeeper, was woken by the sound of the carriage on the gravel and appeared at the front door in her housecoat. A woman who had served 3 dukes and considered all hours reasonable if the occasion warranted them. "Mrs. Fenmore," Emmerich said, "this is my niece. She requires a room, a meal, and clothes that have not been repaired 9 times. In that order." Mrs. Fenmore took in Eloan, the dress, the thinness, the coat that was not hers, and the ink on her hand, and performed no visible calculation whatsoever. That was the hallmark of someone who had seen enough of the world to recognize suffering without requiring time to categorize it. "The east bedroom," she said. "I will have the fire lit in 10 minutes." Eloan stood in the entrance hall of Ashfield and absorbed it with the attention of a person reading a room for information rather than comfort. Emmerich watched her examine the staircase, the portraits, the proportions of the hall, and understood, with the delayed recognition of someone catching up to what he should have seen earlier, that she was not overwhelmed. She was assessing. She had been surviving in a household that had stripped her of everything except her capacity to observe, and that capacity had sharpened rather than diminished. Her gaze settled on the portrait of Corwin above the library door. She held it for 4 seconds. He counted, and then turned away with the controlled economy of someone who knew when to stop examining things that cost too much to feel. That night, after Eloan had been fed and shown to the east bedroom, Emmerich sat in his study with a glass of whiskey he did not drink, and Cathmore's quarterly letters spread across his desk. 24 of them, each one a performance of reassurance he had accepted without question, because questioning would have required him to act, and acting would have required him to grieve, and grieving was the one administrative task he had never learned to manage. He read them again now. He read the careful, pleasant lies. He read the descriptions of a girl thriving in a household that had been starving her, and he understood, with the self-accounting of someone who prided himself on precision, that Cathmore's crime was theft, and his own crime was distance, and he was not certain, sitting in his study at 2 in the morning, which had caused the girl more damage. He wrote 3 letters before dawn. The first was to his solicitor in Bath, instructing him to begin an audit of every transaction Cathmore had made with Eloan's trust. The second was to Sir Hadrian Voss, the county magistrate, requesting a meeting at his earliest convenience on a matter he described as both urgent and personal. The third letter he started 4 times. It was to Eloan. An apology. He could not find the correct language for it, because the correct language did not exist for someone who had failed a child by the simple mechanism of believing what was convenient instead of verifying what was true. He set the third letter aside. The apology, he understood, would need to be structural rather than written. It would need to be built, over time, from materials more durable than sentences. He finished the whiskey. It did not help. The audit began in the second week of November, faster than most legal proceedings in Somerset, because Emmerich's solicitor, a man named Otway, who had the demeanor of a clerk and the instincts of a surgeon, understood that speed in these matters was not merely practical, but moral. Every day the audit was delayed was a day Cathmore had to rearrange his accounts. Otway arrived at Ashfeld on a Monday, with 2 leather cases, and the settled expression of someone who had already formed a preliminary opinion and was now seeking evidence to confirm or dismantle it. The trust was valued at £11,000 at the time of your brother's death, he said, spreading the original documents across Emmerich's desk. Lord Cathmore has submitted records showing current holdings of 6,400. He attributes the reduction to the cost of Miss Delvane's maintenance. £4,600, Emmerich said, in maintenance for a girl eating scraps in a scullery. Otway held his gaze. Quite, he said. The full picture emerged over the following weeks, with the incremental clarity of a landscape revealed by receding floodwater. Each new detail exposing ground that had been submerged for years, Cathmore had drawn from Eloin's trust systematically, with the administrative care of someone who understood that theft conducted in proper columns was more difficult to prosecute than theft conducted in haste. The French clock, the stable roof, a London trip in 1813 that had cost £300 and had produced nothing except, Otway noted with dry precision, a new wardrobe for Lady Cathmore and a wine merchant's bill that required 2 pages. The drawing-room drapes alone had cost more than Eloin had spent on herself in the entire duration of the guardianship. Otway calculated that figure too. It was £9, 3 shillings, and 4p. The number sat in the audit like a bruise. Meanwhile, Eloin was not doing what Emmerich had expected her to do. Rest, he had imagined, with the limited imagination of someone who had never been hungry, and had therefore never considered what hunger did to a person's relationship with stillness. That she would need time, recovery, the slow unwinding of deprivation in a warm room with adequate meals. He had prepared for fragility. He had not prepared for Eloin. She was in the Ashfeld library by 7 the first morning after her arrival. Mrs. Fenmore reported this with the neutral tone of a woman delivering information she found privately significant. Emmerich found her at his desk, the one he used for estate business, with the Ashfeld account ledgers open in front of her. "These are estate records," he said from the doorway. "Yes," she said. She did not raise her head. "Your tenancy agreements have not been reviewed in 4 years. The rents on the North Farms are below the current county rate by 11%, and the drainage allocation for the East pasture has been carried forward without adjustment since 1812. He stood in the doorway of his own library and considered his 17-year-old niece, who had been eating mutton scraps in a scullery 48 hours ago, and who was now auditing his estate with the focused competence of someone who had been doing accounts on the back of her own hand because no one had given her a ledger. "How do you know the county rate?" he asked. "Your steward's correspondence is filed in the 3rd drawer," she said. "He receives the quarterly assessment from the Somerset Agricultural Board. I read it this morning." She was still wearing the dress Mrs. Fenmore had found for her, too large at the shoulders, pinned at the waist, and her hair was tied back with a piece of kitchen string because she had not yet acquired ribbons, and on the back of her left hand, the debts from Cathmore's house were still faintly visible beneath a new layer of ink. Notes she had made while reading his accounts. The hand had not changed. What was written on it had. He said nothing about the tenancy agreements. He left the library and instructed Mrs. Fenmore to provide Eloin with paper, ink, a proper writing case, and anything else she required. And Mrs. Fenmore said, I have already done so, Your Grace. She asked for them at 6:30. Cathmore's response arrived in the 3rd week of November, delivered not through solicitors, but through society, the channel he understood best and the one in which Emmerich was least comfortable. The county had learned, with the velocity that information traveled in a place where everyone's business was conducted within 15 miles of everyone else's business, that the Duke of Ashfeld had removed his niece from the Cathmore household and was pursuing a financial audit. The county had formed opinions, the opinions divided along lines that Emmerich found instructive. Those who knew Cathmore socially, and he was a man who had spent 30 years making himself socially essential, expressed surprise, concern, and the cautious neutrality of people unwilling to choose sides until the outcome was determined. Those who knew Cathmore financially, a smaller group with sharper information, said very little, and their silence was its own kind of statement. Lady Thessaly Bromwick was the first to call at Ashfeld. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon with the energy of a woman who had been composing her opening remarks since she heard the news, and had refined them during the carriage ride into something she considered both diplomatic and direct. Lady Bromwick was 53, widowed, wealthy in her own right, and had occupied the position of Somerset's most informed private citizen for so long that the county had stopped questioning whether her information was accurate and had begun simply acting on it. "I have come," she said, settling into the drawing-room chair with the economy of someone who did not intend to waste time on pleasantries, "to see the girl." "She isn't an exhibition," Emmerich said. "No," Lady Bromwick replied. "She is your niece. She has been removed from a household under scandalous circumstances, and every drawing-room in the county is presently constructing a version of her that may or may not resemble the actual person. I would prefer to work from primary sources." Emmerich regarded her for a moment. Lady Bromwick had been his mother's closest friend. She had attended Corwin's funeral. She had written to Emmerich afterward, a letter he had kept, that said simply, "The girl will need more than arrangements. She will need attention. The two are not the same thing." He had read that letter. He had not acted on it. He was aware that Lady Bromwick remembered this. "She is in the library," he said. Lady Bromwick found Eloin at the desk, with the account ledgers and the writing case, and a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. Cold tea, meaning deep concentration rather than neglect, as Lady Bromwick understood immediately. She observed Eloin for a full 30 seconds before speaking, which was unusual for her, and which Eloin noticed. "You are assessing me," Eloin said without raising her head. "I am," Lady Bromwick said, "and you are auditing an estate that does not belong to you." "It belongs to my uncle. My uncle failed to review his tenancy agreements for 4 years. Someone should." Lady Bromwick surveyed the ledgers. She noticed Eloin's hand, where old ink and new ink occupied the same surface in different languages: debt and analysis, survival and work. She took in the dress that did not fit, and the string in the hair, and the posture that belonged to someone who had been sitting at desks her entire life, even when the desk was a kitchen stool and the ledger was her own skin. "How long were you at Cathmore's?" Lady Bromwick asked. "The full duration of the guardianship. And in that time, did anyone from this county visit you, inquire after you, or verify your circumstances?" "Lady Cathmore was kind," Eloin said. "She died in 1814. After that, no. No one verified anything, including my uncle." The sentence landed in the room with the weight of something that had been carried for a long time and set down without ceremony. Lady Bromwick received it without flinching. "Your uncle," she said carefully, "is attempting to correct a failure he is only now understanding." Eloin set down the pen. She met Lady Bromwick's gaze with the direct, level focus of someone who had spent years being managed by adults who believed themselves invisible and who had long since developed a comprehensive ability to see through every variety of well-intentioned positioning. "I am aware of what my uncle is attempting," she said. "I have been aware of it since the carriage. He is converting guilt into administration, which is, I understand, the Delvain method of processing emotion." She paused. "I do not object to the administration. The administration is useful. I object to the assumption that it is sufficient." Lady Bromwick was quiet for a moment. Then she did something she had not done in a private drawing room in 11 years. She laughed. Not the social laugh, the polished one, but the real one. The sound of a woman encountering something genuinely unexpected and finding it genuinely delightful. "You are Corwin's daughter," she said. "I am told this frequently," Elowen said, "usually by people who did not help me when it would have mattered." The laughter stopped. Lady Bromwick regarded her with the recalibrated attention of someone who had come to assess a girl and had found instead a person whose assessments were considerably ahead of her own. "I deserved that," Lady Bromwick said. "Yes," Elowen said. She picked up the pen. "Would you like tea? Mine has gone cold, but I can ring for Mrs. Fenmore. She has been bringing it hourly, which I believe is her method of verifying that I am still here." Lady Bromwick accepted the tea. She stayed for 2 hours. She asked Elowen about the accounts, and then about the estate, and then about the years at Cathmore's house, and Elowen answered with the precise, unembellished directness of someone with no energy for performance and no interest in pity. When Lady Bromwick left, she did not say what she intended to do. She did not need to. Elowen had read it in her posture before the second cup was poured. Something in Somerset was about to shift. Elowen turned back to the ledgers and wrote a figure on the margin of the tenancy review, not on her hand, on paper. And the figure was the first calculation she had made that was not about survival. December brought the cold, and with it, the particular confinement that Somerset winters imposed on large houses, the shortened days, the contracted world, the enforced proximity of people who had not yet established the terms of their coexistence. Emmerich had lived alone at Ashfeld for a decade, and had perfected solitude into a system so reliable that it had ceased, at some point he could not identify, to resemble living. Elowen disrupted the system, not deliberately. She was not someone who disrupted anything deliberately, having spent years in a household where disruption carried consequences. But she was in the library before he arrived in the mornings, and the estate papers he reached for were already annotated in her hand, and the schedule he had maintained for 10 years was being quietly revised by someone who had learned that permission was rarely granted and almost never worth waiting for. He found her on a Thursday evening in the second week of December, not at the desk, but at the window, her reflection visible in the dark glass. She was holding her left hand in her right, running her thumb over the place where the ink had been. The debts were nearly gone now. She had washed them away days ago, replaced by cleaner notations on proper paper. But the habit of checking remained, the way a person checks a wound long after the bandage has come off, not because it still hurts, but because the memory of it lives in the muscle. "You do that often," he said from the doorway. She turned. "Do what?" "Check your hand." She was quiet for a moment. Then she held it up, palm facing him, as though presenting evidence. 7 shillings and 2 pence, she said. "That was the sum on the night you came. I had been carrying it for 3 months. Before that it was 4 shillings 9. Before that, 2 and 6. The numbers changed. The hand did not." He entered the room and sat in the chair across from the window. He did not sit at the desk. This was not a desk conversation. "What did you do," he said, "when you could not pay?" Mrs. Halver, the woman in the village, extended credit. She knew the situation. Most of the village knew. People know things in small places, even when no one says them aloud. She paused. They were kind to me. The grocer, the apothecary, Mrs. Halver. They extended what they could. They did not have much to extend. And Cathmore? Cathmore dined upstairs with guests 3 evenings a week. The kitchen was generous on those nights. What was cleared from the table was available to the staff, and I was, by that time, counted among the staff in all respects, except the ones that would have required him to pay me. Her voice carried no bitterness. It carried the flatness of someone reporting data. He was not cruel in the way people imagine cruelty. He did not strike me. He did not raise his voice. He simply made me disappear, one privilege at a time, until there was nothing left to remove. The room went first, then the clothes, then the meals, then the name. By the end, I was the girl to the other servants. Some of them had forgotten I was a Delvain. Emmerich sat with this. He sat with the image of his brother's daughter, being unnamed in a house his brother's money had maintained, and the knowledge that he had signed the quarterly drafts that funded her erasure without once driving the 12 miles from Ashfeld to see what his signature had produced. I should have come, he said. Yes. I told myself the arrangement was sound, that Cathmore was— You told yourself what was convenient, Elowen said, because the alternative was grief, and you had decided grief was not a task you were equipped to manage. I am not telling you anything you have not already told yourself. I am confirming it. He absorbed this. He absorbed the precision of it, the absence of mercy in it, and the fact that she had offered it, without raising her voice, the way her father would have. Corwin, who could dismantle a man's position with 2 sentences and a silence, and who had clearly, despite everything Cathmore had failed to provide, managed to pass that quality to his daughter before he died. What do you need from me? He asked. She considered the question, not the automatic deflection of someone unaccustomed to being asked, but the genuine consideration of someone deciding what the honest answer was. Time, she said. Not forgiveness. I am not ready for that, and offering it before I mean it would be dishonest, and I have had enough dishonesty to last several lifetimes. She paused. Time, and the library, and the freedom to be useful. Being useful is the only thing that kept me whole in that house, and I am not prepared to stop now, simply because the house has improved. He nodded. It was not enough. He knew it was not enough, but she had asked for time, and time was the one resource he could provide without converting it into administration. The library is yours, he said. It was already mine, she said. I am glad we agree. The corner of her mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was the place where a smile would go if smiles were something she still did without thinking. He noted it the way he noted the numbers on her hand. Evidence of something that existed beneath the surface, waiting for conditions to improve before it emerged. The winter assembly at the Alderton estate was held in the first week of January, and it was the kind of occasion that Somerset society treated as both entertainment and census, a counting of who was present, who was aligned with whom, and who had shifted position since the autumn. 46 people in the long gallery, the full weight of the county in attendance, and the matter of the Duke of Ashfeld's niece at the center of every sidebar conversation conducted behind wine glasses and fans. Elowen attended because Lady Bromwick had insisted, and because Emmerich had learned in 6 weeks that arguing with either of them was an exercise in diminishing returns. Lady Bromwick had arranged the dress, dark blue, well cut, borrowed from her own niece, who was close to Elowen's height, if not her temperament, and had arrived at Ashfeld an hour before the assembly to manage what she called the presentation, which Elowen called being stared at in better clothes. You will be stared at regardless, Lady Bromwick said, adjusting the collar. The question is whether the staring happens in a dress that fits or one held together with kitchen string. The string was functional, Elowen said. The string was a disgrace, and it is no longer relevant. Hold still. They arrived together, Lady Bromwick, Emmerich, and Elowen, a formation the county could read without assistance. Lady Bromwick had positioned herself on Elowen's left, Emmerich on her right, and the geometry of the arrangement communicated everything that required communicating. This girl is claimed, she is supported, and the cost of approaching her carelessly will be higher than you expect. The assembly proceeded as assemblies did. Elowen moved through it with the quiet watchfulness of someone who had been reading rooms since long before she had been welcome in them. She spoke to the Aldertons about the estate, Mrs. Alderton asking gentle questions, Sir Piers asking sharper ones, both of them arriving at the same conclusion by different routes. She spoke to two women her own age, who were curious and cautious, and had clearly been instructed by their mothers to form an opinion and report back. She did not speak to Lord Cathmore. He was present. He had positioned himself on the far side of the gallery with three men whose loyalty he had maintained through the crisis, and he watched the room with the careful attention of someone managing a campaign rather than attending a party. He did not approach Elowen, and she did not approach him, and the space between them carried its own specific charge. It was Cathmore's ally who struck, a man named Aldous Wren, a baronet with a modest estate and an immodest opinion of his own importance, who had attached himself to Cathmore 15 years ago, and had confused proximity to influence with influence itself. Wren had been circulating for 20 minutes, building to his moment. Elowen had tracked him the way she tracked numbers, with automatic precision, and he arrived at her left side during a pause in her conversation with Sir Piers. "Miss Delvain," Wren said, with the tone of someone performing charm for an audience. 6 people were within comfortable hearing. He had chosen his position. Ashfeld Hall must be quite an adjustment. One hopes the accommodations are an improvement on your previous situation, though of course Lord Cathmore's household was always considered very fine. The sentence did the work it was designed to do. The implication was precise, that Elowen's account of Cathmore's house was exaggerated, that her current position was charity rather than right, and that the room should calibrate its sympathy accordingly. Elowen held his gaze. She held it for 3 full seconds, 1 second longer than the social register required, and 2 seconds longer than Wren had expected. She felt Emmerich shift beside her, a movement she recognized as the precursor to intervention, the weight transfer of someone preparing to speak on her behalf. She spoke first. "Sir Aldous," she said, in the voice she had developed over the years at Cathmore's, not loud, not sharp, but so precisely calibrated that the 6 people nearby stopped their own conversations to hear it. Lord Cathmore's household was indeed considered very fine. The drawing-room drapes alone cost more than I spent on food and clothing in the entire duration of my guardianship. I know this because I have seen the accounts. She paused. The exact figure, if you are interested, is £9, 3 shillings, and 4 pence. That was my cost. Over the full period, I kept a record. For a time, I kept it on my hand, because paper was among the things not provided. She held up her left hand. The ink was gone. The hand was clean. But the gesture carried the ghost of what had been written there, and every person within hearing understood what they were seeing. Not a girl performing victimhood, but a woman presenting evidence with the precision of an auditor and the composure of someone who had survived worse than a baronet's insinuation and had emerged with her accounting intact. Wren's expression underwent a recalculation. You merely repeated an impression Lord Cathmore has been cultivating," Elowen said. "I do not blame you for the repetition. I blame the source. But I would suggest, Sir Aldous, that before defending a man's household, you verify whether the household in question contained anything worth defending." The silence that followed had the quality of a room recalibrating. Emmerich, beside her, had not spoken. He had been about to. She had felt the breath, the beginning of the sentence. And he had stopped, not because she did not need his intervention, though she did not, but because he had recognized, in the fraction of a second before his voice engaged, that she was handling the room better than he would have, and that the most useful thing he could do was stand beside her and let his presence confirm what her words were already establishing. Lady Bromwick, across the gallery, watched the entire exchange, with the expression of someone receiving confirmation of an investment she had made weeks ago. She caught Emmerich's eye afterward, when the room had resumed its normal rhythms, and Wren had found urgent business at the far end of the gallery. She raised her glass an inch. He returned the gesture. Alauen excused herself from Sir Piers and crossed to the window, where she stood for a moment with her back to the room. Emmerich followed. "You did not need me," he said. "No," she said. She was studying the dark garden through the glass. "But you were there. That was not nothing." He stood beside her at the window, and they watched the dark garden together, and neither of them said anything further. And the silence between them was, for the first time, not the silence of two people who had not yet found the words, but the silence of two people who did not require them. The legal proceedings against Cathmore concluded in February, faster than anyone in Somerset had expected, slower than Emmerich had wanted. Otway had been thorough. The audit documented every transaction, every forged receipt, every quarterly lie. The magistrate, Sir Hadrian Voss, reviewed the evidence across 3 sessions and delivered his ruling with the brevity of a man who found the case unambiguous. Full restitution of the misappropriated funds, plus costs, plus a formal censure that would follow Cathmore through every financial and social interaction for the remainder of his career. Cathmore paid. He had no choice. The £4,600 was returned to Eloan's trust, along with the interest Otway had calculated, with the meticulous satisfaction of someone who enjoyed precision when it served justice. Eloan received the news in the library. Emmerich delivered it himself, standing at the doorway, their usual configuration, she at the desk and he at the threshold, the geography of two people still negotiating the distance between obligation and belonging. "The funds have been restored," he said. "The full amount. Otway is preparing the final accounting." She set down her pen. She was quiet for a moment. "The village," she said. "The village?" "Mrs. Halver, the grocer, the apothecary, the people who extended credit when no one else provided for me." She opened the desk drawer and removed a piece of paper. Not estate business, something she had been maintaining separately. A list in her hand of every person in the village near Cathmore Hall who had helped her. Names, amounts, dates. A complete record of every kindness she had received, maintained with the same precision she had once used to record debts on her skin. "I would like to repay them. Not the amounts. The amounts are small. I would like to repay them properly. Mrs. Halver's cottage roof needs replacing. The grocer's son wants an apprenticeship in Bath. The apothecary has been trying to expand his shop for 3 years." She held the list out to him. He took it. He read it. He read the names and the notations, and the careful accounting of generosity received by a girl no one was watching, from people who had nothing to spare and had spared it anyway. "This is not a repayment," he said. "This is an investment." "It is both," she said. "It is what the money should have been doing all along." He studied the list again. He studied his niece across the desk. This person who had been eating scraps 4 months ago and was now directing the redistribution of her restored fortune with the strategic clarity of someone who understood that money was not a thing you held, but a thing you aimed. "I will have Otway arrange it," he said. "I will arrange it myself," she said. "Otway can manage the transfers. but I will go to the village. I will deliver it in person. They did not help me through a solicitor. I will not thank them through one. She traveled to Cathmore's village on a Tuesday in the last week of February in the Ashfeld carriage, in the dark blue dress Lady Bromwick had given her, with a leather case of documents on the seat beside her, and on her hand, because she had written them there that morning, deliberately, one final time, were numbers, not debts, amounts. The roof repair for Mrs. Halver, the apprenticeship fee for the grocer's son, the expansion cost for the apothecary, written on her skin in the same careful hand, in the same ink, but the language had changed entirely. She spent the day in the village. She sat in Mrs. Halver's kitchen and drank tea from a chipped cup and told her about the roof, and Mrs. Halver cried, and Elowen did not cry, but she held Mrs. Halver's hand, her left hand, the one with the figures, and neither of them said anything about the ink, and everything about it was understood. She returned to Ashfeld that evening with an empty leather case and a clean hand. She had washed the ink off at Mrs. Halver's kitchen basin, the same kind of basin where, in a different kitchen, she had once sat and eaten scraps. She had washed it off deliberately, completely, the way a person closes a ledger when the accounts are settled. Mrs. Fenmore met her at the door. "Your uncle is in the library," she said. "Of course he is," Elowen said. She found him not at the desk, but in the chair by the fire, unusual enough, and with a glass of whiskey he was actually drinking, an occurrence without precedent. He had a letter in his hand, not a state business, something personal, written in a hand she did not recognize. "What is that?" she said. He turned the letter over. "Your father's last correspondence to me, written 3 days before the accident. I have been carrying it in the desk drawer since he died. I thought it was time to read it again." She sat in the opposite chair. The fire was low. The library was warm. The February dark pressed against the windows. And inside the room, 2 people who had spent 4 months rebuilding a connection that should never have required rebuilding sat with a dead man's letter between them. "What does it say?" she said. "He asked me to visit. He says Elowen has been asking about Ashfeld and wants to see the library. He says she has been reading his accounts since she was 9 and has identified 2 errors in the household budget that his steward missed." Emmerich paused. "And he says she is the best of both of us, and he is terrified of failing her, and would I please come, because he does not trust himself to do it alone." The fire shifted. A log settled. The sound was very loud in the room. "He trusted you," Elowen said. "Yes." "And you did not come?" "No." She held his gaze across the fire. He held hers, and in the space between them, in the warm library with the February dark outside, something that had been held at arm's length since the night in the scullery, something she had labeled as caution, and he had labeled as guilt, and both of them had maintained with the disciplined precision of people afraid of what would happen if they set it down, began, without either of them naming it, to dissolve. "I would like to read it," she said. He held the letter out. She crossed to his chair and took it, and stood beside him, and read her father's handwriting for the first time since she was 11, and neither of them spoke while she read it, and the silence was not empty. It was full in the way that rooms are full when the people in them have finally stopped managing what they feel. She finished the letter. She folded it. She placed it back in his hand and closed his fingers around it. "Keep it," she said. "But stop carrying it as a punishment. He wrote it because he loved you. That is what it says. Everything else is what you have added." Emmerich held the folded letter. He held it the way he had held the whiskey glass on the first night, as though it contained something he was not sure he deserved, but was no longer able to refuse. "Elowen," he said. "Yes." "The third letter." The one I tried to write the night I brought you here. The apology. I remember. I never sent it. I could not find the language. She returned to her chair. She sat. She considered him across the fire with the direct, unhurried attention she brought to everything that mattered. You did not need to find the language, she said. You needed to find me. You did that. The rest has been, she paused, searching for the word with the same precision she brought to figures. Sufficient. It has been sufficient. Sufficient, he repeated. It is not a small word, she said. I spent years in a house where nothing was sufficient. Food was not sufficient. Warmth was not sufficient. Attention was not sufficient. Being acknowledged as a person with a name was not sufficient. She met his eyes. Sufficient, when you have known its absence, is not a lesser thing. It is the entire foundation. He set the whiskey down. He set the letter on the table beside it. He sat in the chair in his own library and received, for the first time since the night of the scullery, the pardon he had not asked for, offered by the person he had failed, in language so precise it could not be mistaken for anything less than what it was. Thank you, he said. You are welcome, she said. Now, the spring tenancy reviews are due in 3 weeks, and your steward has not begun the assessments. I have drafted a revised schedule. Would you like to see it? He almost smiled. The almost was the entire distance between the man who had sat in this study 4 months ago with a glass of whiskey and 24 lies, and the man who was sitting here now, being handed a tenancy schedule by a girl whose survival he had failed, and whose competence he had not earned the right to admire, but admired entirely. Show me, he said. She retrieved the papers from the desk. She sat back down. She began to walk him through the revisions, and he listened, and the fire burned low, and the February night continued outside, and inside the library, the two of them worked on the estate together, as Corwin had once imagined they would, in a letter that had arrived 3 days too late and 6 years too early, and was only now, in this room, being answered. Spring came to Somerset, the way it came to counties that had been waiting for it, gradually, then all at once, until the hedgerows were white with blossom, and the fields were running green, and the county emerged from its winter houses with the accumulated energy of months indoors, and found itself, as it always did, ready to assess what had changed. What had changed was Elowen. The tenancy reviews were completed by mid-March, 3 weeks ahead of the previous year's schedule, and the results were discussed at every table in the county that discussed such things, which in Somerset was all of them. She had renegotiated 4 agreements, restructured the drainage assessment for the east pasture, and identified a boundary error in the North Farm survey that had been costing the estate £40 a year for a decade. The steward, a man named Brannock, who had served Ashfeld for 15 years, reported these developments to Emmerich with the carefully measured tone of someone who was simultaneously impressed and unsettled by the speed at which his professional territory was being reorganized. She is thorough, Brannock said. She is correct, Emmerich said. Those are not the same thing. But in this case, they happen to coincide. Lady Bromwick hosted the spring luncheon at her estate in the 2nd week of April, the first social occasion of the season at which Elowen appeared not as a curiosity, but as a fixture. She wore a dress that was her own, the first purchased with her own money from her restored trust. Dark green, well cut, chosen with the deliberate attention of someone who understood that clothes, like numbers, communicated information. Emmerich watched her navigate the room with the practiced ease of someone who had been reading social spaces since she was old enough to understand they could be read, and who was now, for the first time, reading one that was reading her back with approval rather than suspicion. Lady Bromwick materialized beside him in the way she materialized beside everyone, without warning and with complete intention. "She has your brother's mind," Lady Bromwick said, "and your composure. The combination is, I will confess, slightly terrifying." "She reorganized my library last week," Emmerich said. "By subject, then by date of acquisition, then by frequency of reference. She created an index. The index has an index. She is going to run this county," Lady Bromwick said. Emmerich observed his niece across the room. She was explaining the boundary error to Sir Piers, who was listening with the expression of a man receiving information he had not expected to find valuable, and was finding extremely valuable. "She is going to run this county," Lady Bromwick said. "She is going to run considerably more than this county," he said. "You are proud of her." "I have no right to be proud of her. Everything she is, she built without me." He paused. "And yet—" The following week, he called her to the study. Not the library, but the study, where the Delvain family documents were kept in the oak cabinet his grandfather had commissioned, where the succession papers lived in the bottom drawer, beneath a seal that had not been broken in 10 years. She came. She stood in the doorway, their old configuration, reversed now, her at the threshold and him at the desk. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He opened the bottom drawer. He removed the documents. He placed them on the desk between them with the care of someone handling something that weighed more than its paper. "I have no children," he said. "I have no wife. I have not sought either, for reasons I organized into policy a long time ago, and which I have recently begun to recognize were not policy at all, but a different form of the same failure that left you in Cathmore's house." He paused. "I am naming you my heir. The estate, the title's associated properties, the trusts, the whole of it. Otway has drawn the papers. They require only my signature and your acknowledgement." Ellawen sat very still. "This is not guilt," he said, because he knew she would think it, and because she would be partially right, and because the part of it that wasn't guilt deserved to be named. "This is recognition. You are the most capable person I have encountered in the management of land, money, and people, and you are 18 years old, and you learned it in a scullery with a candle and your own hand for a desk. I am not giving you this because I failed you. I am giving you this because you are the right person to hold it, and I would be failing you again if I allowed my guilt to prevent me from seeing that clearly." She was quiet for a long time. She turned her left hand over in her lap. The hand was clean. It had been clean for weeks, but she traced the place where the numbers had been, the place where 7 shillings and 2 pence had once represented the entire scope of her existence, and she thought about what it meant to go from that to this, from the sum of her debts to the sum of an estate, in the space of a single winter. "I accept," she said, "on one condition." "Name it." "The village, Mrs. Halver's village. I want the Ashveld estate to establish a trust for it. Not charity, investment. A fund for apprenticeships, for repairs, for the kind of help that is given quietly by people who have nothing, because no one with means is paying attention." She met his eyes. Someone should always be paying attention. That was the lesson. That is the condition. He held her gaze. He held it for a long time. And in his niece's face, he saw his brother. Not the recklessness, not the wild rides and storms, but the other thing, the thing underneath, the fierce, impractical insistence that people mattered more than systems, and that any system that forgot this deserved to be dismantled by someone who remembered. "Agreed," he said. He signed the papers. She signed beneath him, and when she set the pen down, she placed her hand, her left hand, the clean one, the one that had carried debts, and then figures, and then nothing, flat on the desk beside the documents, and it was steady, and it was sure, and it was, for the first time since she was 11 years old, exactly where it belonged. The county learned of the succession in May. The month Somerset learned everything, being the month in which the social calendar was dense enough that information traveled through drawing rooms and dining tables and garden parties with the efficiency of a postal service and considerably more accuracy. The reaction was what Lady Bromwick had predicted, mixed in public and settled in private, because the county had spent 6 months watching Eloin Delvine, and those who had watched closely had already concluded that the Duke's decision was the most rational thing he had done in a decade. Sir Aldous Wren sent a note of congratulation containing 2 compliments and 1 implicit apology. Cathmore sent nothing. His silence was, Eloin told Emmerich, the most honest communication she had ever received from him. Lady Bromwick hosted the announcement dinner on the last Friday of May, because Friday dinners were the ones that mattered. 38 people. The full county. Eloin was placed at Emmerich's right. She wore the dark green. Emmerich, seeing her descend the Ashfeld staircase that evening, had paused at the bottom step and said simply, "Corwin's favorite color." "I know," she said. "It is also mine." The dinner proceeded, and at the center of it, at the right hand of a duke who had once failed her so completely that the failure had become the foundation of its own correction, sat a woman who had survived on scraps and silence and the back of her own hand, and who was now the most formidable person in the room. After the dinner, in the garden, in the late May light that did not want to end, Emmerich found Eloin standing at the edge of the terrace, her face turned toward the Somerset Hills, her left hand resting on the stone balustrade. He stood beside her. "Your father," he said, "wrote in that letter that you were the best of both of us. You told me. I did not tell you my response." She turned. "What is your response?" "He was wrong," Emmerich said. "You are not the best of both of us. You are something neither of us had the capacity to be. You are entirely your own." He paused. "I spent 6 years believing I had lost the only family I had. I was incorrect. I had not lost you. I had merely failed to find you. The distinction is important, because it means the error was mine to correct, and I am grateful, more than the word contains, that I was given the chance to correct it." Eloin held his gaze. She held it for a long time, the way she held figures and facts and the weight of rooms, with precision, with steadiness, with the complete attention of someone who did not offer her focus lightly and did not withdraw it once given. "Uncle," she said, and the word was not flat. For the first time since the scullery, the word wasn't a label. It was warm, and it was deliberate, and it carried in it every month since November, the library and the ledgers, and the fire, and the letter, and the village, and the hand that had held debts, and then figures, and then Mrs. Halver's fingers, and then a pen that signed her name beneath his on the succession papers. "Uncle," she said again, and this time it was simply true. He put his arm around her shoulders. She did not flinch. She did not accept it with neutrality. She leaned into it, briefly, completely, the way someone leans into a thing they have decided to trust. And then she straightened, because she was Eloin, and leaning was not something she did for long. "The East Garden at Ashfeld," she said. "What about it?" "The planting scheme is wrong. The roses are in the south beds, and the south beds receive too much afternoon sun for the varieties you have. I have drafted a revised layout. I would like to discuss it tomorrow morning." He almost laughed. It was the closest he had come to laughter in months, and it carried in it the full distance between the man who had driven to Cathmore Hall in November and the man standing now in a May garden, being told about rose beds by someone who had rewritten his estate, his succession, and his understanding of what family meant. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "The library. The library, she confirmed. The May evening settled around them, warm and unhurried, and the Somerset Hills held the last of the light. And somewhere in a village 12 miles south, Mrs. Deeds, Halvor's new roof was finished, and a grocer's son was packing for Bath, and an apothecary was measuring the dimensions of his expanded shop, and none of them were thinking about the girl who had once stood in their doorways with debts on her hand, and no reason to believe the world would improve. But the world had improved, not because someone had rescued her. She had never been rescued. She had been recovered, and the difference was everything. But because she had maintained, through all of it, the one thing no one had thought to take from her: the habit of writing things down, of keeping accounts, of tracking what was owed and what was given, until the day arrived when the accounts balanced, and the hand was clean, and the numbers, all of them, every figure she had ever carried, were no longer debts at all, but the precise and unassailable record of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth.